Hi guys, so it's time to talk about the third horror anthology film that Amicus did, and I was really pleased when I realised that this one was next, because I remembered this being one of the very best of these films that Amicus did, and I've actually got a cracking Blu-ray set for this. I'll show you that later on. But in terms of how I'm going to go about this review, I'm just going to take it the exact same way as I would talk about any horror anthology film. I'm going to discuss each of the stories in the order that they appear in the movie, and then we'll have a conclusion and a score at the end. But before we get to any of that, I've got to talk about the linking story that we have here. It's actually more of a linking location, really, because there's not much of a plot per se. I mean, we basically have a house on the outskirts of a village somewhere, and for our first story, some characters move in, and then they will either die or move out at the end of the story, and then we'll get another bunch of characters moving in for our second story, rinse and repeat all the way until the end of The House That Dripped Blood. So it's quite thin in terms of story, but you know, you don't always need something really clever and convoluted like what you sort of get in the film Asylum, which we haven't yet come to. Sometimes you just need a really simple hook, and that's what we have with this film. There is an estate agent character floating around, and there's a detective inspector who's come down from Scotland to investigate one of the disappearances that happens in the story. So we see these two characters now and again between the main stories, but honestly I don't remember there being that many insert scenes between the main stories in this one. But one thing I did notice is that it's only really in the first story in this film that the house seems to be having some really negative effect on the characters, because it's implied straight away that there is an evil dwelling within this house, an undescribable evil that's just causing all the tenants to have lots of really bad luck. But that's only really very obvious in the first story. Once you get to the second, third and the fourth stories, the horror seems to be originating from outside the house somewhere. So in a wax museum in town, or at an oddities shop, and so forth. And there's another weird connection I noticed between all of these four stories, but I'll come to that a bit later on. But for now, let's dive into the actual tales themselves, and we'll begin with an interesting one about a guy who has writer's block. So first up, we have Denholm Elliott in full Marcus Brody mode. Naive, bumbling. He's brought his wife to this cottage so he can rediscover his writing mojo, and sure enough, on the very first night he's typing away again, writing a new murder mystery novel about a guy called Dominic, aka the Strangler. The trouble is, this novelist starts to see Dominic everywhere he goes, in the back garden, at the top of the stairs, and he thinks he's seeing the actual character. I guess we, the audience, just think that the novelist is becoming one with the character, and he might end up strangling his wife, maybe. Now, this story has a really good atmosphere, I've got to say, but once you get to the end of it and look back on everything you've seen, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like, if you've never seen this film before, I would advise you to just watch this segment, enjoy it, and then swiftly move on to the second story without looking back at all. Please do that. But unfortunately, because I'm doing this review, I had to sort of overanalyze everything, and certain things just don't stack up at all in this story. For one thing, if you go into your study and you see a bloke sat in your chair, you're going to assume that it's some guy who's just broken in, regardless of the fact that he might just happen to look a little bit like one of the characters from your novels. You are not going to think that this is an apparition. It's just not going to happen. And there's a terrible lack of restraint throughout this story. Like the moment where the novelist sees Dominic at the top of the stairs, he's in full view. Now, anybody who spins around to try and catch a glimpse of this guy is going to see him disappearing around the corner. It would have been better just to have Dominic sort of peering out from just the corner. Not only would that have looked a lot creepier, but then I could believe that he could slip away in the time that it takes the novelist to turn around. It's the same with the scene in the garden. So the novelist looks out over this lake and he sees Dominic like 20 yards away, like staring him in the face, doing this kind of sideways grin, like it's Alan Partridge doing horror or something. But don't have him 20 yards away, have him like 100 yards away. So you can just about make him out maybe, and then it's believable that the novelist is going back and forth on whether he's going crazy or not. And that scene where the bloke turns up in the study, I think they should have just taken that scene out completely. There are a few twists here and there in this tale. There's one late on that just baffles me. I have no idea why that even would be there. It doesn't make any sense. I can only put down some of the strange happenings, some of the strange character decisions in this story as being the result of the house just making these people go a little bit do-laddy, because all of the characters here behave rather oddly and make strange decisions during the tale. But I still like it somehow. I've seen this 2 or 3 times now, and every time, even though I know it's a flawed story, I still really enjoy it somehow. This is technically the worst story of the 4, I'd say, but given the fact that it still gets a thumbs up from me just because of the atmosphere, I think we're definitely onto a winner with the overall film. Next, we have the best story in the collection, and it just so happens to star Peter Cushing. So this is the second film in a row where, in my opinion, Peter Cushing has been in the best story. So in Torture Garden, he was in that one with Jack Palance. The Man Who Collected Poe, easily the best story in Torture Garden for me. This time around, it's a little bit closer between this story and one of the ones that we've not yet come to, but I would still say that this one involving the Wax Museum is the best. So this is about a retiree. He's not old, he's maybe 60, but he's clearly got money. He's able to retire early, and he moves into this cottage, and he tells the estate agent that he's going to be fine on his own. He's got things that he can be getting on with, he's got hobbies. But as we go through the story, we sort of realise that this isn't entirely true, because this character is clearly not entirely comfortable being on his own. Now, whether he's always felt this way or whether it's just the house that's making him feel extra lonely, but I think the reason why I would just give this tale my nod as being the strongest thing in this film, it's because there's sort of 2 horrors in play here. That there's the very real horror of loneliness in middle age and old age, and then there's also the more fictional horror that we get with the Wax Museum later on. But having these 2 things in play at the same time just gives this story an extra depth. It makes it a bit more rich, and Peter Cushing definitely gives this main character a bit more nuance than maybe was originally envisioned. And even though I'd already seen this story before, obviously, I still couldn't remember who the villain was, whether it was going to turn out to be the friend who just randomly turns up, or whether it would be the Wax Museum owner. So even coming back to this story again, there was still surprises in store for me. The actual Wax Museum looks fantastic. Anytime you get a creepy looking museum in horror, it's always something that I really enjoy. And the exhibits that you see in this particular museum, absolutely fantastic. Now, there's a character that Cushing references here, some old love of his from years ago. The obvious thing to have done with this story is just make the main character a new widower, a recently widowed guy who's struggling to get over his wife's death, maybe. But they don't do that with this. They sort of imply that Cushing's character has never been married, but he still regularly thinks about this one woman he had a huge crush on years and years ago, or maybe he had a little fling with her and then it got broken off before it was serious. He's still got a picture of her, so something went on there, but it's left him a little bit scarred. He still thinks about this woman. But his friend who turns up also seems to carry the same pain for the same woman. So I got the impression that this woman was someone who made a lot of men's hearts melt and was possibly a little bit of a tease, a bit of a harlot maybe. And it crossed my mind after this story, actually, that one of the common links between all 4 of these stories is that there's a really bad female character in every single one of them. So in the first story, we've got the adulteress. In this second story, we've got this mysterious woman who we never actually meet, but it's possible that she wasn't the nicest woman to all these men who came along into her life. Third story, we've got the young child, if you know, you know. And the 4th story, we've got Ingrid Pitt with fangs. So this overall film could have actually possibly been called The Women Who Spilled Blood, rather than The House That Dripped Blood, but just a little something that I noticed. But going back to this story of the Wax Museum, I just think it's absolutely terrific and definitely one of the highlights of this movie. Sweets for the Sweet is possibly not the best title for what this is. So Christopher Lee moves himself and his daughter into the house that dripped blood, but he's overly protective. He doesn't want his little girl going to school, so he has her homeschooled. He drafts in this female teacher from somewhere, and she sets about educating the child in one-on-one sessions. But it was clear to me from a very early stage in this that the reason for the daughter being homeschooled was either that she is secretly demonic or evil in some way, or the father is just abusive and doesn't want his little girl going out into the world. And if that possibility came to pass, then no doubt the house would exaggerate his worst traits, etc., etc. But from what I can recall, I think I correctly guessed the outcome of this story the first time I watched it. It doesn't have an awful lot of Christopher Lee in it. In fact, of the three main characters, he's probably got the smallest part. I don't think he drew the luckiest of balls out of the bag when it came to the parts in this film being dished out. But if we go back to Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, he had that absolutely cracking story about the disembodied hand. So swings and roundabouts. But the person who really carries this story is the woman who plays the school teacher, Nairi Dawn Porter, I think her name is. I'd never heard that name before this week. I totally do not recognise this actress outside of this film, and yet she really impressed me in this. She does a good job of guiding this story through the quieter parts, which is most of it, because there's not the same amount of action and things happening in this one as there are all the way throughout the first two stories. But this actress really holds this thing together very well, I think. If I could have changed one thing, though, about this story, I would have had the school teacher begin a relationship with the father. I think that would have added an extra layer to the whole thing. Obviously, it would have meant taking the wedding ring off the school teacher and pretending that she's single coming into this. But if those two had got together in this, I think that would have led to a situation where, yes, Christopher Lee would have been enjoying having this new girlfriend, but at the same time, we would have been able to see from his facial expressions that it would have led him to being worried that it would only further quicken his daughter's towards him, if you see what I mean. It definitely would have given a lot more meat on the bone for Christopher Lee to chew on, but they haven't gone down that route. This story's still fine. It's just one of the slowest moving in this particular film. A typical 3rd out of 4 type story, if you will. So we've arrived at the final story, and this one has only just missed out on being my absolute favourite of the collection. It is more satire than horror, but it's very funny, and I thoroughly enjoyed it every time I've watched it. So here we follow an actor who moves into the cottage because he's shooting a movie nearby. He's somebody who has apparently spent his entire career just playing vampires. This guy is basically what Christopher Lee might have become had Lee not exercised a degree of caution in certain early parts of his career in the 60s and 70s. But what I really like about this fictional character is that when he's grumpy on the set, and he is very grumpy, he walks around with a cloud over his head, even though he's dating Ingrid Pitt, like 25 years his junior. It's kind of weird. But he seems to really care about the horror genre and these vampire pictures. A lot of his chagrin seems to be that people aren't taking it as seriously as he is. If they'd have made this character somebody who's grumpy because he doesn't want to be on these sets, he wants to be off shooting Close Encounters with Steven Spielberg or something that's going to catch the attention of the Oscars, I probably would have liked this character a lot less. But because he's into horror, I just found myself really warming to him, even though he's kind of rude to the people around him. Now, this story is mostly just humorous. There's not much horror going on for the longest time anyway. And then we do get a bit of horror injected into it because, to cut a long story short, this character finds this cloak that when he wears it as part of his role, he starts to become more and more like a real vampire. And we follow his struggle with that realization. You know, he suddenly can't see himself in mirrors. He suddenly finds himself wanting to bite Ingrid Pitt for real. No jokes. And my only complaint about all of this is that we don't just ride off towards the end of the story, finishing on a horror note. We go back to comedy for the last bit. You know, there's this silly thing where Ingrid Pitt ends up rising up on a piece of string with gnashes in her mouth, like flapping her arms, and it's all a bit silly. And the potential is missed for a really horrific final twist in the dead of night that could have given us a great kind of scare, and I think that would have been a terrific end to all of this. I mean, I still enjoyed it anyway, and it pains me that I can't remember the name of the main actor in this, because he's really good. Ingrid Pitt's good in it as well. I'd completely forgotten that she was in this as well. I'm starting to wonder if I was drinking the last time I watched this, because there's so many bits of it that I couldn't remember. Actresses in it who I totally didn't remember. But Ingrid Pitt just looks really chilled and like she's having a really good time playing this role in this story. There are some hilarious references to the fact that Christopher Lee also played a long-running vampire character in here. So there's a joke at one point about how supposedly the guy who came along after Bela Lugosi really wasn't very good. And going back to the Waxworks story, I'm pretty sure that if you look at the background, there's an exhibit that is clearly a vampire biting into somebody's neck, and maybe that's meant to be a nod to Christopher Lee as well. But this final story, it's so much fun. Honestly, I'm not sure it should have been the final story. Maybe this is one that should have been in the middle of the pack somewhere, and then we finish with a proper horror story. But that's only a minor nitpick. It's really good. There is one final bit where the superintendent visits the house for himself and the vampires rise up one last time, but I don't have an awful lot to say about it. It's fine. If it wasn't there, it really wouldn't bother me. If this film had just ended straight after the fourth story, I'd have been perfectly okay with that. But let's move on to showcasing my very good Blu-ray set for this. Here it is. It's by Second Sight. I don't have nearly as many Second Sight Blu-rays as I would like, but I'm very proud of this one. It's got some really cool stuff in it, such as a huge booklet about the making of the film, and it's also got this double-sided poster. So let's take a look at that. So here we are. That's pretty snazzy. And on the other side, it's even better, actually. Yeah, this is the stuff. It's even got Dominic in the top corner there. If I was single, I would absolutely put this on my wall, but married, sadly. So that's that. Some decent features on the disc as well. 2 audio commentaries. I might have watched one of them back when I first got the set. I'm pretty sure I've not watched both of those. And the quality, the visuals and audio, absolutely superb, as you would expect for a Second Sight release. I am ashamed to say, though, that I paid a stupid price for it. I bought it just after it came out, and I paid something like 45 or maybe even £50 for it. I can't remember which. Now, that's a ludicrous price to pay for one Blu-ray, even a Second Sight one. I can't remember why I paid out that much at the time. I'm really disciplined when it comes to my hobby. I'm not a reckless spender, but I must have just been going through a little phase at the time where I was just throwing caution to the wind, because I'm pretty sure that I spent roughly the same amount of money on the Asylum Second Sight Blu-ray that came out. So I don't know, I had a little bit of a rush of blood to the head at the time, because normally it's not often I spend even half that amount of money on one Blu-ray. But there you go. At least it's a really good film. You know, the fact that I spent £45-50 on this pains me less than the fact that I once spent £18 on Battle Royale 2 without having seen it before, only to discover it was one of the worst sequels I'd ever seen in my life. I still wake up crying sometimes about that lost £18, but not to worry. You know what, shall we get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 bloody axes out of 5. I think this is an absolutely superb horror anthology, one of the best ever, actually. And the only reason I'm not going to 5 is the fact that there are a few little things I would change about the stories here and there, but for the most part, I like all the stories in this. It is probably one of the best Amicus horror anthology films, although still not quite as good, I would say, as Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, but certainly a big improvement over Torture Garden. So there we have it. I'll be back soon to do another Amicus film. Before I go, though, a quick update on how I'm getting along with my Stephen King read-throughs, because like I said in my last video when I was reviewing The Last Breath, I've started to read all of Stephen King's books, but chronologically, and I'm going to do like little updates of how I'm getting on at the end of my videos from this point onwards. So as I said in the last video, I finished Carrie. Sadly, I haven't made much progress with the next book, Salem's Lot. I've ordered it, but it's being a little bit slow to turn up for whatever reason. Now, in the meantime, I did go on Playbooks and I started reading the free sample that you can get of Salem's Lot. You can read like the first 50 pages or something before it then makes you pay for the novel. But last night, or the night before I think it was actually, I came to the end of my free sample, so I wasn't going to pay twice for the same novel in the space of a week. So I've had to just put the novel aside now and wait for my actual physical copy to turn up. But first 50 or so pages, absolutely brilliant. I'm really into it, and I can't wait for the book to turn up. And who knows? But by the time I get to the end of my next video, maybe I'll have finished Salem's Lot. Who knows? But I'll leave it there for today. The House That Dripped Blood was the main feature of this video. 4.5 out of 5. It is absolutely superb. And if you've never seen it, get onto it. Until next time, cheerio, bye bye.